I'm not sure the SBI is going to be
Recording in progress.
No, we're not.
And things were going so well. I think there's like a ghost in here sometimes.
Sorry? Thank you very much. Okay, let me call the meeting to order. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Monday night, September 19th, the regular city council meeting starting a little late because we had a long issue during the study session, but we're here now. So, Mr. Deputy Clerk, would you please read the, I'm sorry. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
We're easy.
Yeah. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Thank you. Now, Mr. Deputy Clerk, could you please call the roll?
With pleasure, Mayor. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember Goethals.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Pappen.
Here.
Mayor Bonilla.
Here. Thank you very much. So, welcome back, everybody. We are now having hybrid meetings. You can be here or you can be someplace else. So here are some instructions for that. Several different ways to participate. For those attending in person, please complete a yellow request to speak slip and hand it to the clerk. You'll find those slips at the back of the room. If participating remotely, use the raise your hand feature in Zoom and you'll be called on at the appropriate time. If calling in via telephone, press *9 to raise your hand, and when called upon, press *6 to unmute. So these options for public comment will remain available until I close the public comment period for that specific item. Tonight we have 4 ceremonial items. So we're happy to have these items, and we're going to start off with a proclamation for the 30th anniversary of Self-Help for the Elderly in San Mateo. We have several. I see a number of representatives back here. Yes, exactly. Yes. We have Deborah Soon, who is Roz Koo's daughter, the legendary Roz Koo's daughter, and 6 members of the Self-Help for the Elderly organization. Please come forward. I'm going to be reading this proclamation, and then I'll present it to you, and I will allow you to have a few words about self-help for the elderly. This proclamation says, whereas San Mateo Self-Help for the Elderly, founded by Rosalind Koo, was established 30 years ago on July 11, 1992, initially to address food insecurity and isolation amongst the senior Asian population. And whereas Self-Help for the Elderly's staff and volunteers are commended for all they do to advance the independence, dignity, and self-worth of older adults. And whereas Located in the Activity Center in the city of San Mateo Central Park, the center has created a safe haven for seniors in the San Mateo area. And whereas Self-Help for the Elderly serves more than 30,000 meals a year through congregate home delivery and take-home meal services. And whereas other key services provided by San Mateo Self-Help for the Elderly include adult education, recreational activities, health services, and voter registration and ballot-related education. And whereas on March 3rd, 2018, senior services were expanded to the Millbrae site, which now also provides adult education and recreational activities and an annual peak of 3,000 meals served. And whereas the city of San Mateo deeply appreciates its long-standing cooperative relationship with Self-Help for the Elderly. Now therefore be it resolved that the city of San Mateo hereby recognizes Self-Help for the Elderly. We extend our best wishes for the lasting success of this worthy organization. And I will come down and present you with this. You can take photos if you like, and you can have a few words then.
May I see?
Well, let's actually pose for a photo. There's somebody here to take a photo.
They brought
Couple of
the
them.
doctor.
There we go. Okay, great. Thank you. And please, have a few words.
Terrific.
I think Rick stole all of my lines. No, but City Council, we are just so honored and delighted to be here. My mother, who I'm sure is smiling on us, had this vision, as we said 30 years ago, and who would have thought that we'd be standing here hence with such a vibrant organization that now serves so many of the needy seniors, not only Asians, but seniors of all kind in San Mateo. I have to remark that one of the great blessings that the center has enjoyed has come from the support of the council, various council members, all through the 30 years. And there's something quite extraordinary, I think, about this council, and that is you really support with your feet. You show up. You don't just read and proclamate. You actually come and you attend and you talk to the people and you make it known that you care. And it's because of you that our tens of thousands of seniors here in San Mateo enjoy the security of knowing that they're not going to be hungry tomorrow, that they're safe, that they can live independently in an environment that is surrounded by joy and by love. And for that, on the behalf of the San Mateo Self-Help for the Elderly, and because of my mom, we thank you very much for this. Have a good night.
Thank you. And now, on to the next item, which is recognition of Reach and Teach for being named a California Legislature Small Business of the Year. And I think we have Derek and Craig, both the co-owners, I believe, of Reach and Teach here to speak tonight. I want to say that this evening we're honoring Craig Weisner and Derek Kikuchi, owners of Reach and Teach Independent Bookstore. In August, Craig and Derek were honored at the California Small Business Association's annual celebration of California small businesses. Reach and Teach was selected for outstanding recognition by state legislators. This council is proud to further acknowledge Reach and Teach for their dedication to community values, education, and human kindness. Reach and Teach is indeed a special place, and we directly benefit from the positivity you spread throughout San Mateo. Craig and Derek join us here today to receive this commendation. It is our honor to present you with this certificate of recognition. And there are not many words here, but I'll just briefly. Certificate of recognition to Reach and Teach, Craig Weisner and Derek Kikuchi from the City of San Mateo, congratulating Reach and Teach for attaining the prestigious title of Small Business of the Year for the 13th Senate District. And it has the mayor's signature. So let me come down and present this to you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, City Council, thank you very much. This afternoon, while I was in a conversation on Nextdoor, someone was lamenting about the state of our country and the state of our city here in San Mateo. And what I recommended to that person was that they come down to our store Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday when we're there and just hang out with us for the day and meet all the people that walk by who are wonderful. We live in a wonderful city. We don't agree on everything, but we are kind, compassionate, funny, quirky, passionate people. It's a great city. We thank you for this recognition, and we're honored and privileged to be able to be in that space and meet all of these wonderful people every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Our third ceremonial item is a proclamation for National Preparedness Month. And I believe we have Mr. Jim Yoke from the San Mateo Consolidated Fire Department, Emergency Services Manager, I hope, and I'm going to read the proclamation. Whereas, first I need my glasses. Whereas the U.S. Department of Homeland Security first sponsored National Emergency Preparedness Month in 2004. There I see you, Mr. Yoke. In 2004 as a nationwide effort to increase personal preparedness for emergencies and large-scale disasters in local communities. And whereas National Preparedness Month provides an opportunity to remind us that we all must prepare ourselves and our families now and throughout the year and focus on planning with an overarching theme, a lasting legacy. The life you've built is worth protecting. Prepare for disasters to create a lasting legacy for you and your family. And whereas the City of San Mateo and its residents have demonstrated resilience through ongoing pandemic response efforts and shown that they prioritize preparedness. And whereas the San Mateo Consolidated Fire Department offers free training via the Community Services Response Training known as the CERT program to educate the ever-growing number of both citizens and people working in the City of San Mateo to become more prepared for emergencies. And whereas ongoing emergency preparedness is the responsibility of every citizen and civic organization, and as such, all citizens and civic organizations are urged to make preparedness a priority and work together as a team to ensure that individuals, families, and communities are prepared for disasters and emergencies of any type. And whereas the City of San Mateo is furthering preparedness efforts by their engagement in San Mateo County's Disaster Preparedness Day, which endeavors to educate the community on a variety of disasters and emergencies, to teach citizens life-saving skills and prepare them with essential supplies. And whereas National Emergency Preparedness Month is also an opportunity to pay tribute to America's first responders who put themselves at risk for the safety of their fellow citizens. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Rick Bonilla, Mayor of the City of San Mateo, and on the behalf of City Council, hereby proclaim September 2022 as National Emergency Preparedness Month in the City of San Mateo and call upon all citizens and civic organizations to evaluate and update their plans for a large-scale emergency and its aftermath, dated today and signed by the Mayor. So, Mr. Yoke, since you're not here, we'll allow you a few words here, and I guess you'll receive this proclamation later.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Bonilla, and thank you to everybody there at the City Council. We really appreciate this. This proclamation is a very big deal. It's something that happens and is happening across the entire United States of America. City councils all over the country are doing this. And it's a really important thing because it's a very good reminder about readiness. Readiness is what I talk about day in and day out regardless of whether we're talking about agencies and organizations like yours, or whether we're talking about the general public being ready in their homes and in their neighborhoods. And San Mateo has done a particularly good job of this over the years, but it's something we have to stay focused on, and we have to continue working on to improve on a continual basis. There's never going to be a day at which we can walk in the door and sit down and say, we're done. We've done all that we can do. There is no such thing. And so complacency is our biggest foe. Right now, at this very moment, we've got an earthquake in Taiwan. We have an earthquake that just happened today in Mexico. Pakistan is flooding. Puerto Rico is a mess right now because of a hurricane that rolled through yesterday. And of course, here in California, we have wildfires. So we're in a situation where we can never just sit back and relax. We always have to be ready. And I commend you and I commend everybody in San Mateo for the work that they've done to work on readiness over the years. And this proclamation serves as a reminder that we always have more work to do, and we will continue to keep improving and working to improve our readiness level. So thank you very much. And as time goes by, I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yoke. We appreciate all of your efforts and all the efforts of all of our first responders. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we will move on to the next item. Item 4, ceremonial, is a presentation from Fixin San Mateo County. And I believe we have Jane Goodman remotely. Jim Lawrence. Oh, Jim Lawrence, okay. Oh, no, here's Nancy Goodman. I'm sorry. Thank you, Nancy. Welcome, and please go ahead.
And I think Jim was going to start us off.
Okay. Jim? Need to mute yourself, Jim?
Okay, I have to unmute myself. Let's start the video. The host has stopped it. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Again, my name is Jim Lawrence, Chair of the Board, Fixin San Mateo County. Thank you for allowing us to speak to you tonight. Fixin San Mateo County is a nonpartisan, nonprofit 501c. We have one single mission, representing all the residents of San Mateo County, is to convince the Board of Directors, Board of Supervisors, to install a Civilian Oversight Board and Inspector General's office for our San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. To that end, we're recommending to the board to use their legislative authority, which was given to them via Assembly Bill 1185. So, before I go into the actual bill, let me just give you a little background, a little context as to why we're making this request. We live here in a democracy. All of our elected leaders have checks and balances. Our president, Governor Newsom, Congress, Senate, Supreme Court, etc. Even in Foster City, my local police chief, Tracy, has the city manager, city council. But for whatever reason, our county sheriff does not have any checks and balances. He or the incumbent elected sheriff only answers to no one. Yes, they're elected every 4 years, but so is our president. So with the installation of this oversight board, we, all the residents of San Mateo County, will gain transparency into this vital government function. Remember, we invest $300 million of taxpayers' funds into this organization every year. But more importantly, what we're seeking is to build community trust of those that we've given the right to enforce our laws. Remember, they're sworn to protect and serve in a fair and impartial manner all San Mateo County residents. Along with that, we must demand fiscal responsibility and transparency for those taxpayer dollars. As you can imagine, every budget is stretched. With housing, healthcare, we want to make sure we spend all of our tax dollars properly. Now, I'm pleased to report to you that this past week, the Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to form a subcommittee to study this request. And we're extremely pleased because, as you know, we've been working for the past year to get community support. And it's wide reaching from all of our elected leaders down to just local residents. But tonight here, we're requesting that you also support us and endorse our mission by letting the board know that you also believe we should install a civilian oversight board in Inspector General's office. Now, I won't take up too much time, but I know you like facts and figures because I was a former councilman and I also like them too. So I'm going to turn it back to Nancy Goodwin. Let us take you through a few slides that kind of underscores where we're going. Nancy?
Thanks so much, Jim. And let me share my screen. So I'm Nancy Goodban, and I live in Redwood City. I'm the executive director of Fix in San Mateo County. We are a grassroots group founded in May 2021 by local community volunteers like me and Jim. We did incorporate as a 501c4 last November, and we're really happy that we're endorsed by all 5 federal and state elected officials we have in our area. So that's Anna Eshu, Jackie Spear, Josh Becker, Kevin Mullen, and Mark Berman, which is great. The Half Moon Bay City Council unanimously passed a resolution to support strong civilian oversight. We've got 13 mayors and former mayors, and thank you to those here who are included in that group, and dozens of elected and appointed community leaders. And we're thrilled that more than half the city council has actually endorsed us already. So let me try to go back. Our goal, like Jim said, is independent civilian oversight of the sheriff with subpoena power to address complaints, investigate, and make recommendations. Why? Because it's just, as Jim said, common sense, good government for transparency, accountability, and community relations. So what we're doing is working with the Board of Supervisors and the new incoming sheriff. We want to support the sheriff mission to protect and serve, and we're seeking support from cities and the community, which is why we're here tonight. So my last slide, people say, what is civilian oversight? It varies from community to community, but best practices and what we're requesting is a community-based civilian oversight board, a professional inspector general, who's an attorney with experience in investigations, interviewing witnesses and collecting evidence. Both of these would be appointed by the County Board of Supervisors, and both of these entities would have subpoena power. That's under the recent state law, AB 1185, which allows boards of supervisors to do just that. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Council can't really comment on this because it's not agendized for discussion now. We may discuss this in order to see if we want to put it on the agenda at the end of the meeting under comments and reports. So thank you very much for your presentation right now. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving along, it is time for me to turn the page. Mr. Deputy Clerk, please read the consent calendar.
With pleasure, Mayor. Consent calendar. All matters listed under consent calendar are considered by the council to be routine and will be enacted by one motion without discussion. If discussion is desired, that item may be removed and considered separately. Item number 5, City Council meeting minutes approval. Item number 6, 31 to 57 South B Street zoning reclassification ordinance adoption. Item number 7, 2021-22 consolidated annual performance evaluation report adoption. Item number 8, 385 Second Avenue and 1 Transit Way lease amendments. Item number 9, grand jury report. Waiter, there's a car in my soup. Response letter. Item number 10, September nights on B, event adjustments. Item number 11, merit employees salary schedule approval. Item number 12, Community Development Department and Department of Parks and Recreation job specification updates. Item number 13, citywide ash tree pruning 2022 agreement. Item number 14, Edward Byrne 2022 Justice Assistance Grant Program application. Item number 15, Axon Virtual Reality Training Simulator amendment. Item number 16, Radio Dispatch Console System agreement and amendment. Item number 17, San Mateo Complete Streets Plan appropriation and agreement. Item number 18, King Recreation Center Family Changing Room Construction contract. Item number 19, On-Call Transportation Services for Various Projects agreements. Item number 20, Darby Avenue and Curiosity Way pedestrian and bicycle access easement acceptance. Item number 21, Mariners Island condos public improvements acceptance. Item number 22, Police Department patrol vehicles purchase contract. Item number 23, Citywide elevators and lifts maintenance service agreement. Item number 24, Downtown San Mateo grade separation railroad crossing elimination grant funding. Item number 25, 2022-23 sanitary sewer route foaming South Basin agreement. Item number 26, on-call private development mapping services amendment. Item number 27, 2022 citywide sanctuary sewer cleaning and inspection large diameter pipe project contingency amendment. Item number 28, statewide Proposition 1 resolution of support.
Thank you very much. Is there any member of the council who would like to pull any of these items for discussion? Seeing none, is there any member of the public who would like to pull one of these items for discussion? Do we have anybody online that would like to?
There are no hands raised, and I have no request to speak in person.
Good. Then we will close that public comment period. We'll bring it back to the council for a motion.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
And do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second, and we will now call the roll call. Mr. Deputy Clerk.
Councilmember Goethals?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Pappen?
Yes.
Councilmember Lee?
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez?
Yes.
Mayor Bonilla?
Yes.
The motion
Thank you very
carries.
much. Now we're on to public comment. This is public comment for items which are not on tonight's agenda. Any member of the public wishing to comment on any item not appearing on this agenda may address the City Council at this time. State law prevents council from taking action on any matter not on this agenda. Your comments may be referred to staff for follow-up. Public comment is limited to a total of 15 minutes. However, an opportunity for additional public comment may be provided later in the agenda if needed. And we're going to set the timer for 3 minutes. Are there any public commenters?
We may have one in person, and
Thank you.
we have one remote panelist.
Okay.
Yes.
Our first in-person speaker is Michael Reagan.
That is you.
Good evening. I'm going to try this one more time. I was here a couple of months ago, and I think you guys might have passed it on to Public Works regarding the Hillsdale High School improvements that were neglected over the last several years. I've been trying to get this thing done through the Public Works by talking to them, but I'm just getting a lot of lip service. I've contacted them. I've had discussions with them regarding some of the items that need to be repaired in and around the school, but so far nothing. So I'm hoping to, maybe you guys can maybe put a foot to their proverbial rear ends and maybe get this thing done. School's already started and nothing's been done. I was hoping to meet with them, but they've seemed to find my input not very not very responsive or very important. But I would like to resolve this. I hear a lot about talking about, how important it is the health and safety and welfare of the city's citizens of San Mateo are. But when in reality is to get these things done seems to be something that doesn't get done. So I'm hoping that this thing can get done before the end of the school year, and I won't have to come back again and bother you people anymore regarding this issue. So thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reagan. Mr. City Manager, do we have somebody who we can refer Mr. Reagan to?
Excuse me, I will talk with Public Works, and then I will follow up directly.
Thank you very much. Okay, are there any other?
Yes, we have one remote speaker.
Okay.
Ryan, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good evening, City Council, Honorable Mayor. I just wanted to raise an issue that I was made aware of regarding a crosswalk removal that is planned on Peninsula Avenue and Prospect. This is in between El Camino and California Drive. And essentially what's happening is one good thing is happening in the sense that the city is installing a high visibility crosswalk with, I believe, a flashing beacon on one side in order to improve visibility of pedestrians. So that should have some improvement for pedestrian safety, although given a collision that was nearly fatal that we saw on Franklin Parkway recently, we understand that those treatments are not the end all be all for pedestrian safety. But what's concerning about this Peninsula project is that it also entails the removal of a crosswalk at that same intersection with no clear reason that's apparent to me or to others I've spoken with. And I have reached out to city staff about this, but I just wanted to also put it on your radar. Why are we removing a crosswalk at that intersection, which would make folks have to cross potentially cross the street 3 times in order to get to a destination? I just think that we were owed an explanation, and I'd prefer halting this crosswalk removal until we can have that conversation at the very least with city staff. We should be making physical improvements like speed cushions or road diets to streets like Peninsula, or even installing stop signs, regardless of what warrant analyses say. And we should be taking these actions sooner rather than later, and not waiting for a tragic crash to occur to take action. So that's my spiel, and I hope that we can halt this crosswalk removal at least until we can get an explanation about what's going on and what the reasoning is, and preferably reverse that decision that has been made by Public Works. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are no further requests for public comment.
Seeing no other speakers, we're going to close the public comment at this time. We're going to move on to item 29, which is an ordinance introduction, Senate Bill 9. And I believe we have some staff presentation here.
All right, thank you. Good evening. My name is Laura Richstone, Associate Planner with the Community Development Department, and I'm here to provide an introduction of a local ordinance to implement the provisions of Senate Bill 9. Tonight, we'll start with a brief introduction of SB 9 and review the previous City Council policy guidance areas. Then I'll provide an overview of the draft ordinance, interim objective design standards, code cleanup regarding the city's historic preservation regulations to be consistent with CEQA, and the Planning Commission's recommendations on the draft ordinance. Effective January of this year, SB 9 is a state law that seeks to increase housing production in single-family zoned areas by allowing qualifying parcels to be developed with 2 units through a ministerial process. 2 main types of development can occur under SB 9. 1, 2-unit duplex development, and 2, urban lot splits, where a lot can be split into 2, and duplex development can occur on each lot. Objective standards can only be applied to ministerial SB 9 projects, and an SB 9 development may only be denied if the building official makes written findings based on a preponderance of evidence that the project would have specific adverse impacts to public health, safety, and/or the environment, and where there's no feasible way to mitigate the impact. In 2 study sessions held in February and June of this year, the City Council provided policy guidance in 6 areas where local agencies can exercise some local discretion within the confines of the state law. These areas included demolition limits, public noticing, the number of dwelling units permitted on urban lot split properties, unit size limits for units larger than 800 square feet, open space requirements, and potential subdivision map life extensions as allowed by SB 9. Feedback from the City Council included increasing demolition limits from 25% established by SB 9 to 50% to be consistent with existing zoning requirements, to provide a courtesy informational public notice prior to project approval, to limit urban lot split properties to 2 dwelling units per lot, to allow units 800 square feet or less through a ministerial process, and allow units greater than 800 square feet as determined by the maximum FAR of the underlying zoning district through a discretionary process. And finally, to not increase map life terms beyond existing allowances, which is up to 8 years, and to not impose on-site open space requirements. Staff has drafted a local SB 9 ordinance that is aligned with state law and incorporates the council's policy guidance. In addition, staff is proposing interim objective design standards applicable to all SB 9 development to address the lack of objective standards in the city's existing residential design guidelines, and a code cleanup to the municipal code's definition of individual historic structures that codifies current practices which are consistent with CEQA and creates consistency between the municipal code and the general plan. 2 community workshops on SB 9 were also held. The first workshop was in May and focused on feedback on potential development standards, while the second workshop in August focused on an overview of the major components of the draft ordinance. Between 10 and 17 people attended these workshops, with the majority identifying as residents of San Mateo. Polls taken during the most recent workshop revealed that 40% of attendees supported limiting urban lot splits to 2 units, while the remaining 60% supported 3 or 4 units, either outright or through a tiered approach based on the size of the resulting lots. Attendees were also evenly split between requiring discretionary review for units larger than 800 square feet and not requiring discretionary review for SB 9 units regardless of size. Comments related to supporting infrastructure, tree protection during the SB 9 process, the discretionary process, and access requirements, to name a few, were also raised during the most recent community workshop in August. The proposed draft ordinance follows and meets state requirements and is based on the feedback provided by council and the public. Major provisions of the draft ordinance include review and permit processing, additional development standards above the state requirements for 2-unit duplex and urban lot split development, and interim objective design standards. For review and processing, SB 9 units 800 square feet or less would go through a ministerial permit process. If the project meets objective standards, including objective design standards, the unit or units would be approved at staff level without a public hearing or public input. To allow additional flexibility and development above the minimum required by state law, larger units would be allowed, subject to the maximum FAR of the underlying zoning district. Larger units would be subject to the current design guidelines and would go through a discretionary process similar to what is currently required for new houses or large second-story additions. Both permit processes would require either a courtesy notice for ministerial projects or a public notice for discretionary projects. The courtesy notice would inform immediate neighbors and tenants of the proposed new development, but would be explicit in that the development proposal is not open to public comment or appeal. The ordinance follows state standards for parking generation, setbacks, and minimum parcel size, among others, for duplex development and urban lot splits. Where the state has a maximum height of 16 feet for SB9 units, the draft ordinance proposes a maximum plate height of 16 feet and peak height of 24 feet for detached units, and a 24-foot max plate height and 32-foot peak height for attached units. This would align with the height limits allowed for accessory dwelling units, as SB9 development and ADU development could result in very similar development patterns and potential impacts. As stated, parking generation would follow the state standards, but could either be covered or uncovered to the applicant's discretion. Additional local standards for urban lot splits include requiring a 10-foot wide driveway or access corridor only for newly created flag lots and or landlocked properties for adequate access, and also limiting each newly created parcel to a maximum of 2 dwelling units, which is inclusive of ADUs and JADUs. Staff has also included interim objective design standards. Currently, the city does not have objective design standards for single-family and duplex development. The proposed interim objective design standards are based on the city's design guidelines, provide design standards that would be applicable to ministerial SB9 projects, where no objective standards are currently applicable, and contain standards related to architectural style of attached units, scale and massing, and the placement of windows and doors. The proposed objective design standards are intended to be interim in nature and will be superseded or amended to align with the final adopted version of the city's duplex and multifamily objective design standards, which we are currently working on in a separate permit track and effort when they are approved. Staff is also proposing a code cleanup to our historic resources regulations. The proposed code cleanup is separate and unrelated to the amendments necessary to adopt a local SB9 ordinance. Staff is proposing to update the definition of individually eligible buildings contained in the municipal code. In addition to buildings found to be historic in the city's 1989 historic survey, which was not inclusive of the whole city, this code cleanup would also include buildings determined to be individually eligible for listing through a historic resources report, which would either be independently prepared or peer-reviewed by a city-approved historic consultant. The proposed code cleanup would codify current city practices, create consistency with CEQA requirements, and align the city's municipal code with the general plan. The code cleanup concerns individual structures only, does not affect the ability to designate or establish historic districts, nor does it amend the current definition of what a contributor building is. The draft ordinance is based on the initial policy guidance provided, as I said, by City Council and the public. On August 23rd of this year, the Planning Commission voted 4-0 to recommend approval of the proposed draft ordinance and interim objective design standards with the following recommendations, and to not recommend approval of the proposed code amendments to Chapter 2766, the Historic Preservation Chapter of the Municipal Code. Regarding demolition limits, the Planning Commission recommended to remove discretionary review and allow up to 100% demolition through a ministerial process, provided the project conforms to objective standards. For urban lot splits, the Planning Commission recommended increasing the number of units allowed on an urban lot split property from 2 units, as recommended by the City Council, to 3 or 4 units based on the size of the resulting lots. Regarding unit size limits, the Planning Commission recommended removing discretionary review for larger units and allowing all SB9 applications, regardless of unit size, to be processed ministerially. In addition, they recommended that at least 1 unit be able to achieve 1,200 square feet, even if total cumulative development exceeded the maximum FAR of the parcel. For height, as SB9 development and ADU development can result in very similar development patterns in terms of size, setback, and impacts to neighbors. The ordinance proposes the same height restrictions as what is required for ADUs, which is a lower height limit for detached units. The Planning Commission recommended removing the lower 16-foot plate height and 20-foot peak height limit for detached units, and allowing all units to achieve the maximum height of the R1 district, which is a 24-foot plate height and 32-foot peak height. The draft ordinance requires newly created flag lots or panhandle lots to provide a 10-foot wide access corridor to the nearest public right-of-way for site access, vehicle, ADA, or otherwise, emergency access, such as emergency services and fire, and for the provision of public services like sewer and water lines. The Planning Commission recommended an access corridor be only required when parking is required for an urban lot split, or when it is required per the fire code to serve the property. The interim objective design standards proposed are based on the current design guidelines and ADU regulations as stated. The proposed interim objective design standards for privacy include a second story window glazing requirement for windows up to 5 feet from the finished floor when those windows are located within 5 feet of a property line. This standard was pulled directly from the ADU regulations, as ADU development and SB9 development can result in similar privacy impacts due to their 4-foot side and rear yard setbacks and potential similar height limits. The Planning Commission recommended that the second story window glazing requirement be removed from the objective design standards. Staff also recommended a code cleanup to the historic preservation chapter, as we discussed, which would align the definition of historic structures in the municipal code with the general plan and state law, by also including individual buildings determined to be historic through a historic resources report. This change would not affect current practices, is necessary for compliance with current state law, nor would it affect the establishment of historic districts. The Planning Commission recommended to not update the definition at this time. Oh, pardon me. Staff would like to flag 2 small corrections in the draft ordinance. Section 2 on page 11 of the draft ordinance is not needed, as it is also reflected in section 1, and references to section 27.21.035 should instead refer to section 27.21.045. Staff would also like feedback on when the council would like to see a report of the effectiveness of, if adopted, the eventual ordinance in either 10 projects or 3 years, whichever comes first, or 10 projects or 1 year, whichever comes first. In conclusion, staff recommends that the City Council adopt an ordinance to amend the San Mateo Municipal Code to add Chapter 27.21 to Unit Development Overlay District to implement the provisions of SB 9 with the 2 small corrections previously mentioned, to amend Chapter 27.66, Historic Preservation, to update the definition of individually eligible buildings, and adopt a resolution to establish interim objective design standards for single-family and duplex development. Thank you. That concludes my presentation. Myself and other planning staff are here for any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, staff. Let me bring it over here to the council, see if we have any questions. Who would like to start? Okay, Councilwoman Lee.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a clarifying question. If you don't mind explaining what HAA is and how that might work with our ordinance.
Yes, the HAA stands for the Housing Accountability Act. It was a state law passed recently that streamlines housing development to promote development of housing and certain classified developments that propose new units or additional units above existing, have a streamlined process, are only subject to objective standards and the like. How that correlates with our project. Some SB9 development projects may be HAA projects, some may not. HAA projects that are also SB9 projects would have to adhere to our objective design standards if they go through the HAA process. But those two laws, SB9 and HAA, can work well together.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that the total universe of SB9 projects is broader than the HAA projects, right? And that there may be some margins that, like in the example of a lot split, that does not involve development of 2 units that would not qualify as an HAA project.
That is correct. SB9 allows a lot split with no development. It allows just single-family houses and those types of developments on each lot. And those types of developments would not be HAA projects.
Thank you, Lauren. Could you speak a little more directly into the microphone?
Sorry,
Thank you.
trying to look and, yeah.
Okay, so then if that's the case, then when we're considering the incredible cost in investment from staff's perspective and also the community's perspective when we go through a discretionary review process. My question is, when we're discussing those, some of those bullet points here that are recommending a discretionary review, are we only talking about the projects that are non-HAA projects?
Yes. So the discretionary review project, or process, I should say, kind of serves 2 purposes. It allows for units larger than the minimum 800 square feet as allowed by state law. It also allows for design flexibility or, design flexibility for our objective standards. Like if an applicant doesn't want to adhere to an objective standard, we build that flexibility in so they don't have to go through a variance process. So it is ultimately to try to make the development as easy as possible outside of just adhering to the objective standards.
Great. So if I'm understanding you correctly, what we're discussing in terms of the times that discretionary review will apply are completely outside of those other projects that are HAA projects that meet all objective standards and are granted ministerial approval.
HAA projects can and still do require, depending on the zoning, discretionary projects, but their development standards are much more objective and linear. So you can have an HAA project that does need a discretionary review, but it would just have to adhere to the objective standards, which is easier.
If I may, through the mayor, I think practically speaking, you're right. You can have an SB9 project, and some of those, they're generally they'll be ministerial. And you have some HAA projects that are kind of within it. You can have an SB9 project that is also subject to the HAA. For example, maybe you have a lot split, and then you also have maybe a duplex on each of the resulting lots. That would be an HAA project. It's ministerial, but it's also, if that development meets all objective standards, then even if it goes above the 800 square feet per unit, it's discretionary, but the discretion is extremely limited.
Right, and so I guess given how, extremely limited, meaning the only grounds for objecting would be making a determination that it somehow has adverse impacts to health and safety. Is that correct?
Correct.
In your career, have you ever seen any project meet that threshold?
No.
Okay, so given that that is almost never the case, is there, are we discussing eliminating discretionary review for projects that that are SB9 projects, meet the objective standards, qualify as HAA projects to be ministerially approved. I'm looking at this being an incredible cost savings and efficiency in terms of streamlining our process, but also I just to share a little bit, I think that going through the efforts of a discretionary review process, I think have in some ways really backfired on us as a council, the planning commission, and also the community, because I think that it is easily misunderstood by community that that they have some authority to reject the project based on whatever their concerns are, when in fact there's very almost negligible scope for rejecting a project legally.
Through the mayor, sorry, if I could add to that. Good evening, Manira Sandhir, Planning Manager and Zoning Administrator. So HAA projects that would be subject to discretionary review would also be subject to CEQA. So while it is correct that there's very limited discretion in granting approval for an HAA project based on the findings and objective development standards, there is that additional lens that's added when CEQA is applied and one has to evaluate the potential impacts of a project.
So, and at what point is that triggered?
When it's a discretionary review and approval, whether it's an HAA project or any other kind of planning application, CEQA kicks in, versus if it's a ministerial project where there is a statutory exemption from CEQA for the ministerial actions.
Right. So, so from an efficiency standpoint and from a cost perspective for the applicant, that creates an additional cost and hurdle. When we are able and empowered to determine when discretionary reviews should take place. Okay. Thank you. And so I guess my other line of questioning is I just wanted to better understand or just get sort of confirmation in terms of the historic, the changes to our definition of historic resources. Because I just wanted to better make sure that I'm totally understanding that SB 9 projects are exempt, or no, sorry, do not apply if there's been a determination that the property is a historic resource. So meaning that it is designated, not eligible, but designated and on that list. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so is there any scenario where the changes that we're making to our definition of historic resources, including eligibility, would that then expand the scope of how we interpret SB 9 exemptions?
No, it does not affect the SB 9 ordinance. Councilmember Lee, it's tied to how we apply discretionary review for projects that are that have 50% or more demolition.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Goethals.
I honestly don't remember the historic preservation ordinance coming before us in the past, and maybe it has, I just don't remember. Is there an additional level of liability that we face if we are amending the ordinance in a way that could be considered not objective? Because I'm looking at this and it seems like we're making it more vague.
So the change to the historic preservation ordinance is unrelated to SB 9. They're on completely separate tracks. The change to that ordinance, the historic ordinance, it doesn't contradict state law. It doesn't pose an obstacle to SB 9 applications. It is unrelated to SB 9 projects. This was just a way, since an ordinance was coming forward to involve a change to the zoning code, it was a way to clean up a portion of the zoning ordinance to make sure it was consistent with the general plan inconsistent with state law. So let me explain just really briefly, because this is just putting SB 9 aside for the moment. Right now, if a building is more than 45 years old, historic resource evaluation is conducted. And if that building is determined to be eligible for, say, the California Register, depending on if it's, there's 4 criterion that one has to analyze. Is it associated with historic events, people? Is it exemplary of a certain type of architecture? And there's one other one too. So in any event, if it's deemed to be eligible, then a demolition of that resource would be considered a significant impact under CEQA. It might require an EIR. So it doesn't matter if it's on, say, the California Register or eligible for. They're treated in the same way for purposes of CEQA. So this change doesn't impact current practices that the city is engaged with now. What I just described is what the city has to do under state law. If this change is made, the city will still do that. If this change is not made, the city still has to follow that process. This is purely cleanup to make sure it's consistent with the general plan and CEQA law.
I accept your representation of the purely cleanup. My next question, I guess, would be, and I have some specific examples in my mind of homes that are more than 45 years old where there was some question about whether they were historic or not, and where multiple evaluations were done by the homeowner, by the city, and then we had to go to a tiebreaker. In situations like that, are we amending this to make it easier for the homeowner to say, yes, we get to do this, easier for the city to say, no, you don't, or what?
It's neither, because it's a change that reflects state law. So in that situation that you describe, I can think of some examples too. But, where you have a discretionary project, there is some dispute, for example, as to whether or not that building is a historic resource or not. Sometimes you will have a so-called battle of the experts, right? The applicant may have their historic resource consultant prepare an historic evaluation. Then maybe there's a project opponent that has their own evaluation prepared. Those get peer reviewed by someone hired by the city, and then they get checked against technical standards, legal standards, and then staff presents its analysis to the decision-making body. It could be the city council or the planning commission. They make a decision. So the proposed change doesn't make it easier or harder for either a project applicant or opponent or the decision maker. It's just reflective of existing law.
We are not expanding the ability of neighbors to weaponize historic value in homes or something like that.
Any more than currently?
Fair enough. Your answers to my question were incredibly helpful. That was exactly what I was looking for, and I appreciate it very much.
Next? No. Going back a little bit to questions that were just asked. You said, Prasanna, that the ordinance we're talking about, strictly cleanup, unrelated to SB 9, and yet suspiciously it's here right with it, right? And it just begs the question for me, why? Because there are federal resources, there are state resources. We've already seen dueling reports that cause nothing but difficulty and bring about, I think, CEQA review, as well as another thing I'm going to talk about in a little while, discretionary review of things that I think it's questionable whether we need discretionary review. But why?
Well, I think the planning staff can address that question as well, but I'll start off the response. I think as mentioned in the staff report, the city council doesn't have to adopt this now. It could. I think staff is recommending it, but it doesn't have to. If the council wanted to, it could put this ordinance amendment aside and say, we'll take it up later, maybe look at it with a more comprehensive review of the historic preservation ordinance. If the council wanted to do that legally, it certainly could. That's a policy decision. And as for why it's coming up now, maybe I'll turn to the planning staff for that.
To add to what Prasanna said, the reason it's before you today is because staff identified a gap between our zoning ordinance and our general plan. And to make that consistent, we thought it would provide more clarity to our applicants as well as staff on what the level of review is for individually eligible historic resources. So as Prasanna pointed out, it's just a cleanup. Since we saw that there was a gap, we wanted to clean it up and bring it before the council since we had SB 9 coming forward as well. However, it is completely severable from the SB 9 ordinance and could be taken up at a later date should the council want to go down that path.
Thank you. So another question now, will this help the city avoid complications in the future that we have recently endured?
Our practice would still remain the same. I think there were questions that were raised about historic district evaluations recently, and those that's a different part of the code section. So this particular amendment will not affect those conversations. I think those are larger conversations.
Okay, so just confirm, I think I heard though that during questioning from Councilwoman Lee that a property would need to be designated, not eligible, but actually designated a historical resource. Okay. Now, going back to the discretionary review on Housing Accountability Act projects, I have some concerns because I believe that we're going to see many, for instance, the 800 square foot limitation. I think that what SB 9 is designed to do is to encourage some infill building. And I think that some homeowner is going to sell a home and it's going to have maybe a 10,000 square foot lot, and a developer is going to buy it and they're going to say, well, 800 square feet is not enough. And so then I guess that would trigger discretionary review, which then also triggers CEQA, and I think triggers for us probably many different instances of staff needing to do lots of reviews in terms of a lot of work, right? Many more hearings under these discretionary reviews to be able to permit something which I think ostensibly appears to me to be allowable under SB 9 as it exists. It wouldn't discourage larger units. I believe a developer that sees the opportunity to buy a single-family home lot and subdivide it and build 2 homes or a duplex on either one. And I have another question too, I'll ask that in a minute. But I don't think it's going to discourage it. And let's say, in fact, I was looking when you presented your initial slides there. I think your slide, your first slide, slide 3. Can we see that, please? Because I think a lot of what I saw was talking about like only allowing certain heights on a second building on a property. So as if it's being treated exactly like what we described when we were talking about ADUs, where you have a separate building in the backyard, maybe on the back part of the lot. But what I'm looking at here, it says duplex A, duplex B. They're side-by-side 2-story units on a single lot, I'm guessing. Or no, actually, you could split a lot and do duplex A on the left and duplex B on the right. And, or maybe you could, yeah, exactly. So does this trigger discretionary review, either one of those?
Are you asking if the height?
Well, I mean, the height, I mean, do we require glazed, frosted windows on the second floor, which we don't require on any new home that's built on the same footprint on a similar lot?
Yeah, so if it depends on what the height standards are adopted as. If the council decides to adopt the lower height standards, then a development would not be precluded from going higher. They would have to just go through the discretionary review process so that staff could look at the impact of a potentially taller structure 4 feet from a property line and potentially 4 feet from another ADU or SB9 development. So that's one route. That's where the discretion is built in. Or you can go the other route, which is just the same height standards throughout the whole lot.
Same height standards that underlie the R1 zoning in the area.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So this brings to mind for me another question. I mean, it's almost as if we're talking about lower heights and glazed windows and all of these other things, the way we spoke about with ADUs, it's almost as if we're trying to discourage SB9 construction.
That wasn't my intent or staff's intent when writing it. It was, we saw the discussions that occurred for ADUs, the height discussions, the privacy discussions, and because SB9 development can result in very similar development in terms of size and setbacks, we based our initial efforts on what was already done for ADUs as a good threshold. But if council decides to direct us in a different direction, we can come back to you with different standards.
Right. So it can, but not always. For instance, these buildings could be built on the same exact footprint. In fact, a developer may choose to want to demolish 100% of the place so he can have a new foundation with seismic standards, upgraded seismic standards, new plumbing, new electrical, a completely efficient building, right? New building. And on the same exact footprint as the building that stood. So it's not built into the backyard, and it's got the setbacks that are required. It's not hanging over the neighbor's house. So I just don't see where we're trying to get with this.
It is true that you could scrape and rebuild exactly in your footprint.
And still have a backyard.
And still have a backyard, but SB9 allows many different types of development options.
Right.
There's many permutations, and it's hard to figure out what an applicant will do. Usually when there is a scrape and rebuild, new builders build to maximum, and existing houses are not maximum at the moment. So it really depends on what the builder wants to do and what the lot configuration is. I can't really speak to how those developments will carry out.
Thank you.
Because we've only seen one application right
Yeah,
now.
thanks. So, I mean, I raised this, especially when I heard CEQA, because I just spoke with a developer the other day who has a building downtown that staff's been working with for 3 years. And they were recently told that, well, it's going to take until sometime next year because now we have to start the environmental review after all sorts of back and forth that went on over a bike lane and loading zone and everything else. And I just wondered, do we actually have enough staff to do all this work if we implement these regulations?
So,
yeah, I see. It looks like you're ready to comment.
Yeah, I would like to just provide a little bit of clarification. And so you asked about the intent of the discretionary process. And I think that would be to account for areas that were not like what you see on the slide. So what you see on the slide is what would be allowed by right. And so if an applicant comes in and they want to do something extra or something different, then it gives them an avenue for flexibility. So the intent of the discretionary process is not to place limits, it's to provide flexibility, because a variance is a lot harder to obtain than an exception through the SB9 discretionary process that we're putting before you. I would also add, not only have we only seen just one project so far, but we don't know how many of them will come in and actually meet the objective standards versus those that would want to do something above and beyond those standards. We're also looking at a staff level ZA discretionary approval, so it's not a situation where each one would require a public hearing. And also, many times, the CEQA would qualify as an exemption. And so there would be no environmental review that would take place, but it would allow a situation where we could intervene and make that assessment. And, the question was asked earlier about HAA projects and safety and all of that. And we haven't seen any because typically the HAA projects we've seen have been multifamily. They've been larger. They haven't been these single family properties which could have different implications and situations than the kinds of multifamily HAA projects we've been seeing so far. So I could think of, our hillside neighborhoods and potentially a steep lot with drainage problems or something like that could come before us. And it could want to ask for some kind of an exception that would allow them to build. And this could provide an avenue for us to be able to address those narrower, more unique circumstances where someone is looking for flexibility, but where it may warrant some kind of a review. And what we trigger those thresholds at is up to you all. And so we can look at those, but that is the rationale. It was to expand the flexibility, not to restrict.
Well, it seems to me like this is casting kind of a wide net. And I'm wondering if there's some other more specific way we could allow for what you just described that might, be more targeted than what sounds like it's rather broadly.
If I may, as I recall, the discussion that we had last time was just as Director Horsberger pointed out, that we wanted to be able to make it so that people would not be restricted to 800 square feet. But in the event that you did choose to go above 800 square feet, what did the surroundings provide? And it's not that we're trying to make it hard or we're trying to impose things on staff. What we're trying to do is reach a balance within the community. Because there are some people that say, I don't really care, build as much as you possibly can. And there are other people that say, build it within the confines of what might fit into the neighborhood, or that doesn't look right into my bathroom when I get out of the shower. So we didn't know what that would entail, and as we've seen, there could be many different alternatives, but we did want to provide that opportunity to go above 800 square feet, because as I understand it, SB 9 only says, and every city that's adopted this has said only 800 square feet if you're going to do an SB 9 project. So this city is looking to go above and beyond the 800 square feet, but we're trying to make it so that we take into account the surrounding circumstances. It might be a hillside. I remember when we talked about it, we talked about your back alleyway, and you said, nobody's ever going to be in my back alleyway. That might be an instance where it makes sense to go above it, but it may not make sense if you are literally on top and you've got only the 4-foot setback, which is a change in the law. So that's why we wanted to give ourselves and the community some opportunity to adjust to something that might be larger than 800 square feet. But no city on this peninsula has taken up more than 800 square feet for an SB 9 project. So we really are trying here. I just think that we have to take into account the whole world and that we're all in this together. So that's kind of where it came from last time. And I remember we had this discussion about the back alleyway, and that might be a perfect opportunity for somebody to build more, but if you're right against your neighbor's fence, that might not be.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Just to use that example, so a project is, say, 850 square feet. It is because it is above the 800 square feet, it triggers the discretionary review. At what point, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the evaluation criteria, whether the project is 800 square feet or 1,000 square feet or 1,200 square feet, the evaluation criteria is constant and it defaults to the objective design standards. So if we are going through a discretionary review and ultimately the evaluation criteria is constant, which is does it meet objective design standards, there's no basis for rejection based on the size. Am I understanding this correctly?
Can I make a point of clarification? So I just want to say first, there is the opportunity for council to provide a higher threshold than 800 square feet. It could be 950, 1,000. But to my point, if a project is over that threshold, whatever it may be, it would be kicked into our discretionary permit, which would default to our single-family design review guidelines, which are not objective, most of them. So that's the slight difference. If you are ministerial, less than 800 square feet, objective design guidelines. If you are over 800 square feet, you're discretionary. You're larger, you could be more impactful. So the thought was, let's apply our objective design guidelines, which allows planners and neighbors to engage with the property owner can you relocate your window? Can you put a higher fence for privacy impacts? So that's the difference between the two.
So you're saying it's objective design guidelines, but they're not objective?
So our SFDDR guidelines, they're guidelines, so they're not objective currently.
I would also point out that height height and size, they are development standards. And so if the standard is set at 800 square feet, that is the objective design standard. And what the applicant would be doing would be asking to do something more. So they would be asking for flexibility. Their option would be to go back and meet the objective standard, and then they would be allowed by right. So I think because size is sort of built into the ordinance, it doesn't stand out as a design standard, but it is one of the things that we would typically consider to be a design standard.
So, and this is helpful education. So you're saying that there's the single-family design guidelines?
Correct.
Right? And then what happens in terms of how do we make that sausage? What does that look like?
Can you clarify?
Like what? So community gives input, and then
it would follow our regular standards, so our regular process. So if someone came in and said they wanted to do a new second-story addition to their house, that requires an SFDDR, single-family design review application, and that is reviewed by staff, both objective standards and then our guideline standards, which are more soft. So are your windows nicely placed? Are they conforming? Do they look into your neighbor's property? Could you potentially reduce a window? So that's more of the haggle, for lack of a word, that goes into our design guidelines. Our guidelines are written in a time when objective standards weren't, very prominent in development. But as we see with state law and other things, we're moving into the realm of objective standards. But our guidelines currently allow that back and forth, that back and forth between neighbors, applicant, and city to create a development that is palatable to all. Sometimes, so yeah.
And are we working towards getting objective design standards?
Yes.
What's the timeline on that?
Through the mayor, we currently have a draft from our consultants, and we are reviewing it. We expect to conduct some outreach early next year and bring it to council.
Okay, thank you.
If I may just also point out that you have interim objective design standards before you, which are part of your package for tonight.
Okay, I think I'm going to let my questioning go at this point. Are there any other questions?
I'm ready to hear public comment.
Is it?
I'm ready to hear public comment.
Okay, we're ready for public comment. Oh?
No, my button's all screwed up. I didn't need to leave it on.
Oh, okay. We're ready for public comment. How many public commenters do we have?
We have one comment in chambers, and we have no hands raised in Zoom.
Let's go with 3 minutes each.
We have two comments in Zoom.
Okay. Anybody that wants to comment who is online, please get on now and let us know that you intend to comment.
Our first speaker will be Michael Reagan.
Again, since I'm sitting back there and listening to this, okay, thank you. I know this is not your fault, and this is the state of California that's doing another idiotic proposal, and that's why so many people are leaving this state, because of these idiotic regulations that they're implementing. And I understand you guys are having a hard time trying to implement this. Why you would go over the 800 and try to make it as difficult as possible, I don't understand. Other cities aren't allowing it because they're trying to not to destroy the single-family neighborhoods that I worked my ass off and have been paying for the last 35 years in the city of San Mateo to try to stay in and support myself and my family. So I just believe that the difficulties, I'll give an example. I live in the Hillsdale area. Alder Lane had just put in a ADU, and it's a mess. I mean, basically, there's no backyard left. There's no parking. It's on the lanes. Once everybody moves into that 2 buildings, there's going to be very little parking left. They're going to infringe on the neighbors. I think it's going to be really quite difficult for that street to work with that. Privacy is going to be gone if you're allowing houses 2 stories. I can basically say people are going to be staring down into your backyard. There's just so many problems that this, it's like opening a can of worms that this SB9 has implemented that you guys are trying to resolve. And I'm hoping that you make it as difficult as possible, and hopefully our next city council will do the same, and to try to make it as difficult as possible because this basically is a developer's delight, because I don't think there's a single family person or that owns a single family home that wants to fill their backyard with another large house and have absolutely no backyard for their families and their children, and just for the single family environment that we've tried to create. So those are my thoughts. They're not very well put together, but I hope they do have some influence on whether you guys or the next elected officials. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Michael Weinhauer. Michael, please unmute your mic.
Yeah, hi, Mayor, members of the council. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, never be too sure. After hearing all this, I'm a little alarmed by some of it seems like Mayor Bonilla and Councilwoman Lee are trying desperately to override what little shreds of local control we have left to cling to. And I am saying that you really need to stick to what I think you guys had a lot of input last time. There were a ton of callers in that last one where you came down with the guidance to have a discretionary review process. You should absolutely align the historic, the code to align with to include historic assets throughout the city. The SB9 has a specific exemption for that, so you will not run afoul of SB9 as far as I can tell. And there's, it's important to protect those assets. It's what makes San Mateo unique. And the idea of that your neighbor's going to do the right thing and consider you without a discretionary process is a complete fallacy. All the recommendations that the Planning Commission made that pretty much throw out all of that community input that came from that last meeting that drove the draft ordinance that you see in front of you, it just shows, again, how out of touch they are with what people really want and what should be done with this ordinance. So I'm asking you to reject all of those proposed changes by the Planning Commission. Stick to what you put in there and adopt the staff's recommended changes to the historic languages, et cetera. And for God's sake, do not get rid of that discretionary process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ryan. Ryan, please unmute your mic.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Ryan Motoshemi. I'm calling I have one question, which is, perusing through the staff report, I didn't see as much summary of why the Planning Commission made the recommendations that they did. I mean, it's clear that there are differences, and I think that the differences between the staff and Planning Commission recommendations deserve more than just a summary of what the differences are and why those differences exist and what justifications the Planning Commission had in unanimously making certain recommendations. So I hope that some of those justifications come up in conversation today, or if staff could try to summarize the Planning Commission's discussion, perhaps that might glean a little bit of insight into what into why there are differences. Other than that, I would say that if we're trying to encourage housing being built, I would support loosening the standards compared to the staff recommendation. I mean, what we're saying about going over 800 square feet is that you can do it, but you have to go through a potentially long, drawn-out process. And if you want to discourage building housing, then that's what you should do. You should do that and subject residents trying to build on their property, because remember, SB 9 has owner occupancy clause. SB 9 still requires all structures to conform to building standards. So there is no threat to health and safety from loosening these standards. But you're just making the process harder, using up staff time that could be used much more efficiently for other projects, planning larger projects, and also putting more staff bandwidth into active transportation and transit improvements and our unfunded capital improvement program. Instead, we're spending valuable staff time trying to nitpick where a window is located in a development. So I would encourage that we consider the Planning Commission's recommendations and maybe if it's going to a larger square footage above 800 square feet somewhere, that is more where the threshold between discretionary review is or not. Maybe that's something to consider, but consider something to make housing easier to build than just this 800 square foot threshold. And consider how the HAA applies to this project as well, applies to the SB 9 projects and objective versus discretionary review subjective standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Seema Patel, followed by Michael Nash, who will be our final speaker.
Thank you.
Good evening, City Council. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight. I should note that I serve on the Planning Commission, but my comments tonight are my own as a resident. I just wanted to offer two technical things to consider. Staff rightly noted that the discretionary review process allows applicants to go above and beyond. So for example, if they wanted to demolish more than 50% of a structure, they can, they just have to go through a discretionary review process. And if they do so, then they are subject to the subjective design guidelines of the single family home design guidelines. And I just wanted to note that if they are building 2 or more units, they are protected by the HAA, and those projects can't be denied if they don't meet those subjective design guidelines. So I think it is most likely that people are going to use SB 9 if they're building 2 units. If an applicant just wants to demolish a primary structure and build a single family home, that's a single family home project. If they want to build a detached structure, that's an ADU project. And so I think the council should consider optimizing for the 2-unit use case and then ask what benefit is gained by subjecting projects through a discretionary review process when those projects can't be denied for not meeting the subjective design guidelines. I believe Mayor Bonilla mentioned that the discussions have been centered around the similarities between ADU projects, but these 2-unit projects can be quite different. One example is the slide that staff was just showing with all of the different options that could be built under SB 9. And all of those options look very much like single family homes, but I believe that the way the ordinance is drafted now, those structures would be subject to glazing requirements on the 2nd story, which current single family homes are not. Even though they look very similar to single family homes, they're positioned on the lot as a single family home would be positioned. So again, I would urge council to consider the scenarios where SB 9 projects are different from ADUs and think about whether they should be subject to different design standards than a single family home. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Michael Nash, followed by Erica, who will be our final speaker. Michael, please unmute your mic.
Yeah, here I am. Good evening, everyone. Mayor Bonilla, councilors, I applaud your endurance. At any rate, just a couple of quick points. I think what Michael Weinhauer said is really important, and I endorse that. We talk about discretionary review from one perspective, but it is where the people who are most impacted by construction have an opportunity to review it and comment. And I think it would be a real insult to the residents to take that away when people are trying to do something that exceed the excessive ordinances that our state is forcing upon us. Secondly, it may happen somewhere, but I find it offensive to have people refer to anyone interested in sustaining historic assets in a city that they're weaponizing the historic buildings. That's absolutely not the case. For 30 years, the city has known that it has a rich inventory of historic homes and has failed to take the action that was recommended back in 1990 to resolve that issue. So when somebody raises and says, why aren't you and why isn't anyone concerned about this 500 plus inventory of homes, that you hear a lot of opprobrium from officials who, whether speaking as a commissioner or privately, still manage to make inappropriate remarks. So I think that's something that we should curtail. And I think that the city should take a hard look at the restoration of historic assets before they're all gone and we have a really ugly city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jordan Grimes.
Yeah, I thought it was Erica.
That's our final.
That will be the last speaker then.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, good evening, Council. Jordan Grimes, just want to clear something up first. It is very clear why people are leaving the state. It's housing costs, directly tied to the severe supply shortage that we're struggling with. Every poll, every statistical sampling over and over again shows that. That is fact. It is lack of housing and sky-high prices, not the allowances of duplexes, that are causing people to leave the state. That claim is absurd. The idea that all positions on various topics bear and are worthy of equal merit is fallacious. There are serious inequities and imbalances here. And I have to ask, why are we letting comfortably housed homeowners, people who already have secure housing and don't have to worry about rising rents and displacement, set public policy on what can and cannot be built in this city? We talk about quality of life of residents in San Mateo. What about the quality of life of the thousands of residents who are rent burdened due to the severe lack of housing supply in the city? We should be making it as easy as possible to build new multifamily housing under SB 9 as we can. We should be expanding on the legislation, trying to make it more efficient and useful, not hamstringing it. Doing so will only give the state further license to strip us of what little local control we still have, and they would be right to do so. Minimizing the number of new units added to single-family neighborhoods, I would note, was among the least important things when planning for future housing needs in the city that was found by the True North survey earlier this year. 68% of San Mateans believe that to be among the least important things when planning for future housing needs in the city. I encourage you to embrace the Planning Commission's changes. I encourage you to make it easier to build gentle infill multifamily housing in our neighborhoods, to get rid of discretionary review, to make this legislation truly work in San Mateo. Thank you.
Through the mayor, we have one additional request to speak.
Okay, well, I thought we had closed.
Comment just came in.
Okay, let's take this as the absolute last one.
Final.
Thanks.
Erica, please go ahead and unmute your mic.
Oh, thank you so much. I thought you guys forgot about me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Bonilla and City Council. Thank you so much for letting me just say a few words. I actually, really, I understand that you have a very difficult, situation here. I think that, we have really good intentions. We want to build housing for as many people as possible. I don't believe that people are leaving the state just because of housing. I think there's other issues, climate issues, there's fires and all sorts of things. which is awful. So people are having to deal with a lot of things. But I think that we live in a really great city. We could have looked at houses elsewhere, but we've decided to stay here because there's this amazing culture. It's so diverse. It's got diverse housing. I live in a small house this is called a single family neighborhood, but it's not. It's an R2 neighborhood, which I love. I have all sorts of folks living near me that I really enjoy talking to that have diverse views. I do want to just take these last few minutes to say that, again, I didn't like the term weaponizing. I believe that we should maintain a professional culture in the city council, a professional culture when we talk to each other. We're all professionals, and we're human beings, and we're all trying to do the right thing. So be kind to each other, and please respect what staff is recommending. I believe that they're working really hard, so let's also consider what they've come up with. So thank you so much, and have a good evening. I appreciate your time.
And so we are closing public comment. And I have a request for comments right here.
I actually have a question, if I may. This has been very educational and clarifying for me, and I wanted to revisit some of the other city adopted ordinances. We have this handy comparison table, and one of the things that Deputy Mayor Pappen brought up is our conversation about the different sizes that we have in R1 zoned lots, ranging in thousands of square feet, right? And given that there's such a wide range of lot types, like there's R1 or R1A, R1B, and R1C, I thought it was really interesting looking at some of the other ordinances, like for example in Millbrae, who they've done some good work on this, and by calling out a FAR or percentage FAR, I think that structuring an ordinance with a percentage FAR is a great way to provide the kind of flexibility across the different lot sizes that we have for R1. And so I wanted to just ask staff to kind of talk about what the difference in, for example, the Millbrae 55 FAR and 50% lot coverage could look like in the city of San Mateo, given our different lot sizes, and how that would potentially work differently than, say, creating a maximum of 800 square feet.
So we still have an FAR percentage for our R1s. Depending on how large your lot is, we'll just say it's roughly 50%. It might be more for larger lots, but it's roughly 50%. That would still apply to SB9 projects as the ordinance is currently written. However, we just have the additional layer of 800 square feet, but you can go over to reach your maximum FAR for the lot through a discretionary process. Millbrae didn't parse their ordinance that way. They just had a blanket 55%. Sorry, it's been a minute since I've read Millbrae's ordinance. But they also did require some affordability restrictions for new units that can potentially be, inhibitive of development. So
If I may add, so Millbrae also has a 50% lot coverage requirement, which restricts the amount of structures that can cover the entirety of the lot, so that's limited to 50%. And in terms of their height, they mentioned 25 feet, which is about the same as ours.
It's about 1 story. You know, if you do, it's about 1 story.
But essentially, there are different tools that cities can use, and it's a menu of options. You know, our city has existing standards around FAR, as well as height, and those are the standards that we try to make it consistent with what we have versus trying to explore like the full menu of options that would be available to a city.
So we already have a percentage FAR at 50%. So
Roughly.
Roughly
It varies
50%.
based on the size of the lot and whether it's R1A, R1B, or R1C zoning district.
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
So I would like to propose that we adopt staff's recommendations. I think that they were hashed out by the council, and we've taken into account a lot of different scenarios that could come up. And I appreciate the time and energy that the council has put into it. And I think we all worked very hard at trying to come up with something that was going to be fair to the entire community. And in my mind, I would like to proceed with adopting, or tonight we just introduced, is that correct? So I'd like to propose that we introduce staff's recommended ordinance, and I'm okay with the changes to the historical as well. And what was, you needed something else from us. Maybe you could put up the slide.
I will pull up the slide, Erin.
The third item was the resolution for the interim design standards, objective
Okay,
design standards.
and that's okay by me. And thank you, Ms. Roostone. I thought you did a terrific job, so I appreciate it.
So that's a motion?
Yeah.
I guess we need a second.
I would second that.
And let's look at this just to be sure that we're clear on what we're talking about here. Exactly, this is what you're recommending?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you need them separated out, or you can do them all in one motion?
You could do it all in one motion. I would just note that that would include the corrections made by Laura earlier during your presentation. There's some duplicative language in the ordinance, and she mentioned that the second duplication of that in section 2 could be amended out, and there was an incorrect cross-reference.
Okay.
Okay, well then I guess we need a roll call vote.
Deputy Mayor Pappen?
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez?
Yes.
Councilmember Goethals?
Yes.
Councilmember Lee?
Yes.
Mayor Bonilla?
No.
Motion carries 4-1.
Through the mayor, there is one area of feedback we were seeking. So we did propose coming back to council after we have processed either 10 applications or within a year of this ordinance being in effect, or possibly 3 years. Is there any direction that you would like to provide staff of when we should come back to you?
No, I actually thank you. I was going to ask if we could do that. So thank you. I'm glad that's part of what's included here. Thank you.
So I like the idea of 2 years. I don't know why you gave us 1 or 3, but I actually like the idea of 2. I'll defer to the council.
No, I think the 10 applications should be sufficient for us to see the shape of what we're looking at. Okay, so if that takes 1 year or 2 years, I don't know, but I think if we get to 10 applications, or 2 years, I guess, whichever comes first. Okay, yeah,
That works.
okay. Okay, well then I guess we're on to reports and announcements.
We have one more item on
Oh,
the
we
agenda.
do? Oh, geez.
New business.
I'm like one of those horses you rent down by the beach, ready to go home. Yeah. Item 30, consideration of contribution to San Mateo Foster City Education Gala and Auction. And I think our city manager has some comments on this.
Just very briefly, I'll go while Aaron's pulling the report up. It's very brief. For the San Mateo Foster City Education Foundation has their annual gala and auction coming up. I think it's on October 21st, and it's themed Night at the Museum this year. For the past 2 years, the City Council has made a monetary contribution in the amount of $7,260 and has also contributed an in-kind gift of bowling with the City Council that we've yet to follow up on. And so we have prepared a resolution should council want to make a contribution to this year's gala. We can do it for whatever amount council would like and any other in-kind gift if council would like. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from the council on this?
Will the council that was sitting at the time that it was adopted be required to actually make good on that prize?
Yes.
Excellent.
You won't catch me there. Okay, I'm actually going to try to look this up here. Because I have to admit, I did fail to review this earlier. So, I think that what you're talking about in terms of the matching the previous donation, thank you. And the night of bowling, that would be interesting. Yeah, so. Yeah, I don't have any questions about this. I think that it's pretty straightforward.
So I would make the motion that we approve the draft ordinance, basically everything here.
Sorry, through the mayor, if there are no further questions, if we could take public comment before.
Sure. Do we have any public comment on this item number 30 regarding contribution to the San Mateo Foster City Education Foundation Gala and auction? Any public comment?
I have no request to speak in council chambers.
Then I close public comment, and I bring back to the council. We have a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the draft ordinance that staff included and basically has all that.
And I believe we have a second.
Sure, the mayor, if I may, this is to adopt a resolution.
Yes.
And do you have an amount in mind?
I'm sorry.
7,260.
7,260. Okay.
I'm sorry, too many people talking at once. There's what?
It's right there on the screen.
It's a resolution, not an ordinance, and we needed the amount of money, and it's 7,260, right? That's all.
Is that the motion?
And that's the second for me.
Okay, that's the motion and the second with that amount and the Bell Mateo Bowl for the auction. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Rodriguez?
Yes.
Councilmember Lee?
Yes.
Councilmember Goethals?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Pappen?
Yes.
Mayor Bonilla?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Okay, so now on to reports and announcements, and I think we should go back to the presentation that we got earlier, which was on the Citizen Oversight Review Committee for the Sheriff's Department, Fixin' San Mateo, which presented to us earlier. Would we like staff to look into this and bring something back to us on this for our review? I see one head nodding.
Bring it back.
Brian, my head's nodding, yes. Yes, you too?
Are we bring back the resolution as was written? Or what are we discussing?
We're having staff take a look at it, okay? And I guess, are we asking them to bring back the resolution, Diane, for us to look at? That's your motion, I think.
Well, I don't have any motion.
Oh,
What does the group want to do?
okay. I'll make a motion to bring the resolution here so we can review it at the next meeting. Is there a second?
The mayor, when you say bring back the resolution, are you asking staff to review and prepare a resolution?
Yes.
Bring back to the council?
Said like a lawyer. Thank you. Okay, so I have a motion, and that was second? Do we have a second?
So,
Let's just talk about it.
yeah, so this
Oh,
is
yeah.
not agendized.
Okay,
So
this
I
is
think
just
we
communications. Okay.
If there are three
Some
members of
direction.
council that are interested in providing the direction to bring this back, we'll bring it back. Is there interest?
Can we raise 3 hands here? to
What's their thoughts?
have staff.
See hesitancy.
I have mixed feeling, like, I've already individually taken a stand on it, whether it's a city council. It's a little early, like they just started studying it at the county level, the supervisor sent it out. Like I said, I've already taken a position on this, but how much time do you want to give the county to look at it before we understand what it's actually going to look like?
Well, I guess that's a reasonable thought. The county has taken some time to get around to taking a look at it because this discussion has been around for several months. And the issues continue to be the same, and they're real issues, which I think we don't need to recount here. But that's okay. If everybody else feels like we need to wait and see what the county's going to do, then I guess that's what we'll do.
I think we'll all be watching really carefully what the outcome of those discussions are.
Good. Okay, good.
They formed a subcommittee, the county did.
Yes, they did.
So they're going to be.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, they did. Okay, good. Well, then we'll leave it at that. Any other announcements, reports? Okay, Mr. City Manager, Mr. Attorney, anybody else? Okay, thank you. The meeting's adjourned.